All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today is a Twitter Tuesday where I'll be answering your listener questions about whether Marcus Mariota or Desmond Ritter is the guy, is Arthur Smith on the hot seat, and whether or not Jalen Mayfield or Justin Shaffer will solve the Falcons' left guard issues.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And of course, I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. Hit that bell, and you'll get notified when we go live because we do the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So today I didn't have topics to talk about. So, I let you guys steer the ship of the show, and you guys always, never let me down when it comes to this and always have some very interesting topics. We'll have some non-Falcons related questions later in the episode, but we'll get into the gritty of the Falcon stuff, and we'll start things off with Jordan Alger's question. JDA Jordan on Twitter, he asked, do you think Marcus Mariota has a chance still to be the quarterback everyone thought he was going to be when he was drafted? If you think it's possible, what do you think would need to happen for him to become elite? So I wasn't personally that high on Mariota in that 2015 draft. I know others were, and those that did thought he would be a top 5 to 10 quarterback in this league. I don't think it's really possible that he could be that. I think it's certainly possible that he could still become like one of the top 12 to 15 quarterbacks, in that sort of Ryan Tannehill, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr tier. I think he's certainly capable of being in that level, but sort of mixing it up with the Josh Allens and the Justin Herberts of the world, probably unlikely. But, what needs to happen for him to elevate his play to that sort of level is the same things that need to happen for all quarterbacks to elevate their play to the highest levels. And, it's funny to me because Falcon fans have been, screaming for the last 3 to 5 years, talking about all the things that have held this team back, that have held Matt Ryan back, not getting the respect that he deserves, all these various narratives that you've heard Falcon fans screaming to the heavens about. And it's all the same stuff. It's, the team can't run the football. They can't protect their quarterback, and they don't necessarily get great play calling. They can get the ball into the hands of their, elite playmakers, and they can't get stops on defense. And then, the minute I say these same things, potentially, probably are going to hold back this next Falcons quarterback, whether it be Marcus Mariota, whether it be Desmond Ritter, then it's like, oh, the negativity on this podcast. So, I think it's the same issue for all NFL teams. You do those things. I'm not going to sit here and say you can plug and play with anybody at the quarterback position, but it's definitely going to help out your quarterback and let him put his best foot forward. Even if you have a historic outlier like Justin Herbert, when you look at the fact that the Chargers have not made the playoffs in the 2 years that Justin Herbert has played, despite arguably having one of the best first 2 years as a starter in NFL history, why is it? Oh, because they don't run the football, they don't protect their quarterback well, and they don't get stops on defense. So it's not rocket science, guys, to figure out this game called football. You just do these things, good defenses, what do? They rush the quarterback, they stop the run, they tackle, and they cover, right? They check those boxes. Same thing with offense. Run the football, protect the quarterback, get the ball into the hands of your playmakers, and you'll have a good offense. So, piggybacking on that is our next question from sports guy Evan. He asks, is Ritter the guy, or should we plan on drafting Young or Stroud? So it depends on what the guy means in your eyes, Evan. If you're talking about the guy that starts the majority of the games for the next 2 to 3 years, I think Desmond Ritter can be that guy. If you're asking me, is the guy, the guy that starts for the next 7 to 10 years and winds up winning that Super Bowl that Desmond Ridder promised when he was immediately drafted, I'm a little skeptical of that. But I look at the Falcons and, their situation. I think there's a pretty decent chance that they wind up passing on a quarterback at the top of next year's draft because they believe in Desmond Ridder. But when you look at it historically speaking, when you look at the quarterbacks, particularly those sort of day two level quarterbacks, non-first round quarterbacks, taken in rounds 2 through 4, outside of Russell Wilson, outside of Dak Prescott, most of those guys wind up being more successful with their second teams than necessarily the team that drafted them. You have guys like Drew Brees and Kirk Cousins and Jake Plummer and Matt Schaub, Jimmy Garoppolo, Aaron Brooks, just to name a couple of good examples. And when you look at the guys that were able to have their success with the team that initially brought them in and drafted him, outside of Wilson, outside of Prescott, it's Andy Dalton, it's David Garrard, it's Derek Carr. And, those are some of the better outcomes when you're looking at a player like Desmond Ridder here. And if you didn't listen to yesterday's episode, I basically broke down for the same reasons we just talked about with Marcus Mariota, why I don't expect Desmond Ridder to be Russell Wilson or Dak Prescott, because the Falcons can't run the ball, can't protect, and it can't get stops on defense. But I think Andy Dalton, David Garrard, and Derek Carr are, some of the better outcomes for a player like Ridder. And that's kind of why, when I did my scouting report on Desmond Ridder a couple of weeks back, I kind of said that's kind of the perfect quarterback to get you into quarterback purgatory, which you could argue, the Bengals were until they were able to get Joe Burrow. The Jaguars were for many years, well after the David Garrard years with, Blake Bortles, and until they got Trevor Lawrence. And we'll see what happens with the Raiders over these next couple of years. But if you're asking me, would I be much more comfortable betting on someone like CJ Stroud or Bryce Young to be that sort of 7 to 10 year starter and Super Bowl winning quarterback? Yeah, I think that's a better bet. The question is just how much of a better bet those guys are going to be. Like, if the hit rate on Desmond Ridder or a second round quarterback like Desmond Ridder is like 20%, is the hit rate on, Stroud or Young, how much bigger is that, hit rate? Maybe 40%. So the odds are certainly better that guy is the guy, as you put it, Evan, but it's not as if you're getting great odds regardless of the situation. And again, it goes back to the thing I said earlier, like if you can increase those odds of that guy having success if you can do the things, running the football, blocking, having weapons, playing good defense, all those various things. So if it comes to me sort of sitting here today and making bets on the future, to me, I would probably think the best bet, the one that I'm most likely to hit on in terms of making money, is that, Desmond Ridder is going to give you a cheap, competent quarterback for the next 2 to 3 years that basically buys you time to build up your roster. And then you can go and get your, Super Bowl winning quarterback in 2 or 3 years. But I look at both Mariota and Ridder essentially as bridge quarterbacks. Like Mariota gets you through probably the first half of this season, then you kind of turn the page to Desmond Ridder for the second half of this season, and then you probably keep rolling with Desmond Ridder until you build up the rest of this roster, and then you have an opportunity to go get your Justin Herberts or your Patrick Mahomes or your Josh Allen or whatever the case may be. So that to me is kind of the hope or the best bet of a possible probable outcome for the Falcons moving forward. So we'll see how it all plays out, but it's hard to sit here and project these things sitting here today. So our next question comes from Jordan Alders as well. Did you go to the Falcons first look practice? If so, what are some of the things you gathered from it? And no, I did not, Jordan. But the two hosts of the ATL Day Ones podcast on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed, and Tanitra Batiste and Jarvis Davis, did go. So if you want to get the lowdown on that practice, of course, go hit up Locked On Sports Atlanta and ATL Day Ones. And you can also check out the A to Z podcast hosted by Mark Zeno and Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, as well as the Locked On Braves postcast, where you get the Locked On Braves breaking down every win, every loss on the Locked On Sports Atlanta YouTube channel. And you can find all those shows on YouTube or your preferred podcast platform. And guys, we have more questions, to answer, including whether or not Arthur Smith is on the hot seat, as well as sort of my preferences when it comes to chicken wings. And before we get into all that, I do want to tell you about Blue Nile. We talked about Blue Nile earlier this year when it was the lead up to Mother's Day. But Mother's Day is not the only time of year where you can celebrate your loved ones with a classic, timeless piece of jewelry. Whether you're looking to pop that question, Blue Nile has these simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, clarity, and setting style to handcraft the perfect one of a kind engagement ring for your special someone. Or maybe you're looking for something a little less permanent. Maybe you're having trouble choosing that item, and the experts at Blue Nile are on hand 24/7 via phone, via chat, and they'll find that memorable gift that fits every person's budget. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And our listeners get $50 off any purchase of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Just use the code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging so that it won't give away what's inside. So shop stress-free and find your forever piece by going to BlueNile.com today. And today's episode is also brought to you by Rock Auto. With ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why wait while the person behind the counter orders parts on their computer when you already have access to rockauto.com at home or in your pocket? Save time and money when using Rock Auto instead of spending up to twice as much for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years with reliably low prices for every single customer. They have everything you need from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Just go to rockauto.com right now. Browse their easy-to-use website and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So our next question comes from Lax Ned. He asks, do you think Arthur Smith is on the hot seat this year? If he wins less than 5 games, could he be canned? Because history shows a lot of coaches get fired in year 2 after a bad season. No, I think the Falcons are well aware that they're in the rebuild, so they're going to give Arthur Smith at least 3 years to get this thing right. Now, things could go off the rails, particularly if there's an Urban Meyer level of embarrassment or scandal this year, but that's very unlikely. Seemingly, Arthur Smith doesn't seem like that type of guy that's gonna, go hang out at TGI Fridays, after hours after the game or whatever the case may be. So I think really the thing that we're monitoring this year is upward or forward momentum. And I think that will allow Arthur Smith to continue to stick around beyond, 3 years or more. I think you're worried about another year of the team finishing in like the bottom 5 in most statistical categories. That's going to be a tough pill for Arthur Blank and Rich McKay to swallow. And so you're kind of hoping that there's improvement, again, probably bottom 10, bottom 12 this year in a lot of those areas. But, hopefully we can get better than that in certain areas, and that's progress. And then probably in 2023, you're hoping kind of to be middle in the pack in most areas. If you can continue to build off of that thing, and then you can continue to build off of that. And then hopefully by 2024, you're talking about a team that potentially is top 10 in a lot of these areas: scoring, defense, pass rush, red zone, all those various things that we're talking about. So, I think a lot of the confidence that you have in this regime moving forward is heavily dependent on how this season goes, how much progress they show this year. I know a lot of Falcon fans give this regime a pass for 2021. I don't necessarily really believe in giving coaches a pass. I certainly acknowledge that they were dealt a poor hand from a cap standpoint, from a roster standpoint, but I think you got to do the best you can despite your circumstances. And when I look at a team like the Lions last year, I felt like Dan Campbell and his staff really did that. They personified doing the best they can and having that team competitive in the vast majority of their games, even against playoff quality opponents. And I didn't really see that from the Falcons, this past year. And I'm hoping that we will see that from the Falcons this upcoming season. And so, those first couple of games where we're facing some of the toughest opponents, we're not seeing this team getting blown out by, 2 or 3 scores like we were seeing regularly last year. Like, I want those games to be competitive, through 2-3 quarters or whatever case may be. I'm not expecting the Falcons to have enough talent or enough ability to outplay teams like the Bucks and the Bengals and the Rams for 4 quarters, but I do think you should be able to go toe to toe with those teams for 2 or more quarters and make it competitive. Our next question comes from Kendall Higa at KHiga19. He asks, dry rub or sauced? I don't discriminate, as the thing says, right around here, all wings matter. I'm hashtag all wings matter, flats, drums, doesn't matter, dry rub, sauce, doesn't matter, sweet, spicy, whatever. If you, have a very specific type of, chicken wing that you prefer and don't like other chicken wings, more power to you. But you put any piece of chicken that has a bone in it, and you put at least some salt on it, at least, like I'm gonna tear that thing up. So that's how I roll. Well, DW at NFL DW on Twitter asks, are bald men the greatest ever? And why is your answer yes? Yes, bald is beautiful. And, from what I gather, male pattern baldness is linked to high testosterone levels. I don't know if that's scientifically true, but I choose to believe that. And so therefore, that's why bald men are best, for all you ladies out there, for the, the YouTube analytics tell me like 2% of the audience right now are ladies. Or if you're a guy and you swing a certain way, like bald is beautiful. Come check out the Bald Brotherhood if you're into that sort of thing. Andy at Andy S. Gallagher asks, who are your favorite players in the league, excluding fullbacks? Well, you just excluded all of my guys, but probably Julio, Aaron Donald, Von Miller have been the guys that I've really, really enjoyed watching over this last decade. Obviously, all these guys are at the end of the road, so I'm going to have to find new players to enjoy watching over the next decade. So that will be a mission I will strive to do, Andy, this upcoming season, to find some more guys that I can fall in love with over the next 10 years or so as I watch their careers. Andy's next question is what are your top 3 dinosaurs? I guess this is topical for the new Jurassic World movie. When I was a kid, my top 3 probably would have been Stegosaurus, Ankylosaurus, and Pachycephalosaurus. Now, as an adult, I'd probably drop Ankylosaurus for Velociraptor. And the movie versions of Velociraptor are cool, but I'm a big fan of the actual Velociraptors, the 3-foot tall dinosaurs covered in feathers, like basically the wolves of the deserts of China 65 million years ago. The movie Velociraptors are certainly cool. Certainly Blue is the only good thing about the new Jurassic World movies. The rest of those movies are garbage. Apparently I'm being dragged to go see one of the new movie coming out, I think Friday, because a friend of mine that is her birthday, and she's fallen sway to the marketing campaign that's bringing all the old folks back. Maybe this will actually be the one good Jurassic World movie because all the people are coming back. But given Hollywood's nostalgia kick, they haven't really been batting a high batting average with sort of the nostalgia and the reruns and the retreads and all these various things. But we'll see. Spider-Man No Way Home worked. Yeah, if you had told me the plot of that movie beforehand, I probably was like, oh, here we go. But they worked it, so maybe it'll work for Jurassic World. So we'll see. Fourth String at Northern Falcon asks, what's your favorite dessert? And what are your thoughts on undrafted free agent linebacker Nate Landman and his chances of making the 53-man roster? So my favorite dessert, that's tough. Probably the dessert I've eaten more of in my lifetime is probably vanilla ice cream. But generally, like if I'm going out to eat and I'm looking at the dessert menu, I don't eat a ton of dessert because usually, I'm mopping chicken wings and other things to get full on my entrees and appetizers earlier there. But usually if I'm scrolling through their dessert menu and I see some exotic flavor of ice cream or exotic flavor of cheesecake, that's usually my go-to. Like, I want to end my nights with the bubble guts or whatever the case may be. I want, I'm not lactose intolerant, but I'm certainly not as tolerant as I used to be. So, I want my stomach or rumbling when I'm laying into bed with my favorite desserts. So as for Nate Landman, I haven't really sat down and watched that much of him. I did watch a little bit of him. And I think I've said before on the podcast, I think any of the undrafted free agents in the front 7 on defense have a better than average chance of making this roster, because I think that's the area of this Falcons roster that is most, at least in terms of their depth chart, most at flux. And that includes Nate Landman. So I think he has a better than average chance. I think the Falcons, if I'm putting down my 53-man roster projection, I think the Falcons will keep 9 linebackers, including 4 edges and 4 off-ball linebackers. Those 4 edges being Lorenzo Carter, Arnold Ebiketie, D'Angelo Malone, and Ade Ogundeji, and the off-ball linebackers being Troy Anderson, Rashawn Evans, Nick Kwiatkowski, and Michael Walker. And I think that 9th guy is up for grabs, and Landman could do that. Coney Dane could do that. Rashad Smith could do that. Dorian Etheridge primarily filled that role last year, so he could also be filling that role. So we'll see how those guys fare. And no, I did not forget Deion Jones. There's a reason why I did not leave him in my 53-man roster projection. And if you've been listening to this podcast over the last month, you know exactly why that reason is. If this is your first episode, congratulations. You have found your new favorite podcast, and it's because I don't think Deion Jones is going to be on the roster come training camp. Greg Bowen at Greg Legg asks, how many Colts games will you be watching this year? My personal over-under is 10. So for me, my under is going to be lower than that. My over-under is going to be maybe 3 or over under. I probably will go potentially over that because basically outside of the Falcons, like the only games I'm really watching are night games, like Thursday night, Sunday night, and Monday night games. Now that the Manning cast is, I hadn't watched Monday night games for like 3 years until the Manning cast came back. But I think the Colts have 4 night games this year. And they have a 5th game that I could wind up watching, which is a Sunday game after the Falcons play the Panthers on Thursday night. And so the Falcons won't be on that Sunday. So I'll have a chance to watch, the 4:00 games. I usually don't watch the 4:00 games on Sunday after the Falcons 1:00 games, just because that's usually time where I'm doing, post game stuff and trying to get the rapid reactions up. So I'll usually have them on in the background, but I don't pay a ton of attention to that. So if there are 5 games, potentially for the Colts that I might wind up watching, and that Sunday game after the Falcons Thursday night game is against the Raiders. And I do plan on making a lot of effort to watch AFC West games. So the fact that the Colts are playing an AFC West team that Sunday probably makes it a high probability I will watch them on that game. So we have some more questions, including talking about the linebacker depth chart, as well as if Jalen Mayfield or Justin Shaffer is going to be their starting left guard week 1. And we'll get into all of those as we continue today's Twitter Tuesday here on Locked On Falcons. But as we continue, I want to ask you guys a favor to head on over to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to help us out and make this show, as well as other Locked On shows, better by telling us what you like, what you don't like. It won't take too much time, and everybody that completes a survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. Thanks in advance. And guys, there's no better time to head on over to betonline.net, the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info, from podcasts to the latest odds, contests, player props, you name it. BetOnline has it all. This time of year is great. This weekend, you got the Belmont Stakes, you got UFC 275. Later on, you got the US Open in golf, Wimbledon, Stanley Cup finals, NBA finals going on, Major League Baseball, boxing, esports, Vegas, casino games. If you want to bet on USFL, you can do that. If you want to bet on future prop bets for Falcon players in the NFL season, offensive rookie of the year, Drake London, coach of the year, Arthur Smith, Marcus Mariota, comeback player of the year, you can bet on all of that at betonline.net. BetOnline is where the game starts. So Scott Casada at One Pylon on Twitter asks, what is your linebacker depth chart heading into the summer, including Deion, and who could you see making a big jump into the rotation? So, the Mike spot, the middle linebacker spot, you got Rashaan Evans atop that. Behind him is Troy Anderson. Dorian Etheridge is number 3, and Nate Landman is probably number 4. That the weak side will linebacker spot, you have Deion Jones, technically, until he gets cut later this summer. But when he gets cut later this summer, then Nick Kwiatkowski, I assume, will be atop the depth chart. Followed by Michael Walker and then Rashad Smith. And I do think we will see a competition between Kwiatkowski and Michael Walker. And, that may answer your question, because Michael Walker will have a chance to be the starting weak side linebacker this season if he wins that competition. But I think Troy Anderson's going to be a player to keep an eye on. We saw the Falcons utilize a lot of 3-3-5 nickel looks last year with Deion Jones, with Foye Oluokun, and Michael Walker on the field at the same time, with Walker primarily facing as a coverage guy. That play where he had that pick 6 was a great example of that against the Panthers last year, where they used that 3-3-5 nickel quite a bit. And I think because Rashaan Evans' limitations in coverage, Troy Anderson has an opportunity to carve out a role in that. I don't think he'll be carving out a role as a starter, but certainly we may see a scenario where the Falcons deploy their 3-3-5 and the 3 linebackers on the field. Instead of being that Evans, Kwiatkowski, and Walker, it may be Kwiatkowski, Walker, and Anderson. So that'll be something to keep an eye on as training camp unfolds. Spin at 954 Spin on Twitter asks, can the Falcons offense improve and score more than 18.4 points per game this season, even with the loss of Matt Ryan? There's a lot of Matt Ryan adjacent questions today on today's episode. But yeah, I think they can. Will they? Remains to be seen. But 18.4 points is what they had last year. 18.4 points over a 16-game season is about 295 points over the course of a season. And when you go back to the decade prior to Matt Ryan, the Falcons failed to hit 300 points, so slightly above that number, 6 times in those 10 years. So it's not unprecedented for a non Matt Ryan led Falcons team to struggle to score more than 18.4 points per game. But, I think they'll be better than that. I hope they're better than that. League average is 23 points a game, roughly or so. I think they'll probably finish somewhere in the 20 to 22 range. So slightly below average. I think they have the capability of being better than league average, but probably not significantly better than league average unless, they're absolutely incredible in the red zone and they're really great at dialing up explosive plays. I expect them to be better than they were a year ago, but I don't think we're going to be, top 5 red zone or top 5 or 10 in terms of explosive plays that we would need to be to make a huge jump to be a team that, can score 26, 27 or more points per game. 254 at not new to this on Twitter asks, 3rd and long, which 4 rushers on the Falcons are lining up? Are you lining up? Well, 3 of them are on the Falcons. That's Arnold Ebiketie, Lorenzo Carter, and Grady Jarrett. The 4th one is not currently on the Falcons because that's a defensive lineman to be signed later this summer. Who that guy is, Larry Ogunjobi, whoever, don't really care. Bring in anybody at this point in time. Paul Alexis at Paul D79 asks, hi, Aaron, greetings from Puerto Rico. Shout out to you, Paul. Hola. Really enjoy the podcast. Do you believe that Jalen Mayfield will be our starting left guard in week 1? And if so, how much improvement do you expect from his play in 2021? Yes, I would probably put money on Jalen Mayfield being the starter. I do think he'll be improved, but, the arrows can only go up technically, right? Like depending on how you feel about Alex Leatherwood's rookie season, Jalen Mayfield was either the worst guard in the league or the second worst guard in the league, at least as far as pass protection goes. Like when you factor in the run blocking, it allowed him to be a little bit better than that. But, I think he'll be better than that. He can be better than the worst guard in the league, but he still probably will be like bottom 10. I know the narrative around Jalen Mayfield is going to be like all his struggles were due to the fact that he was changing positions, which was a contributing factor, but like that's not really why Jalen Mayfield struggled, right? The real issues that Jalen Mayfield struggled with and why I expect him to continue to struggle is because he has bad feet and bad hands. And that's not a good combination to have. And the problem is he's not going to get particularly more athletic. So the feet's not going to get significantly better anytime soon over the course of his career. And when you find players that improve their hands, and if they improve his hands, and that's a pretty big if because not everybody does, experience has taught me it usually takes 3 or more years for that improvement in that hand usage to manifest itself. And so that's why when we drafted Jalen Mayfield, I was like, he's a 3-year project that I don't really think really meshes with the Falcons timeline. But on that note, let's get to buzzes at ATL Falcon Focus on Twitter. He has, can Justin Shaffer take left guard from Jalen Mayfield? If not, is the answer on the roster or a free agent move coming? So can he? Sure. Will he? We'll see. But it's not necessarily a huge hill to climb because, again, as I said, like if I think Jalen Mayfield is going to be a bottom 10 left guard, it's not out of the realm of possibilities, even though I'm not that high on Justin Shaffer, that he could be the 53rd best guard in the NFL this year. That's all he has to be better than Jalen Mayfield, even an improved Jalen Mayfield at that rate. So I say this, what I'm going to say, and I reserve the right to change my opinion on this when I get into my second pass of Justin Shaffer's film later this month before that scouting report. But, my issue with Justin Shaffer, if he does wind up winning the job, is I don't think much is changing, right? When we looked at Jalen Mayfield last year, right, he was a rookie left guard that was a questionable scheme fit that had very questionable technique and very questionable pass protection skills. And when we look at Justin Shaffer this year, he's a rookie left guard that is a questionable scheme fit that has questionable technique and questionable pass protection skills. And it's a similar situation at center, right? Last year, Matt Hennessy was a second-year undersized center that had limited starting experience. Drew Dahlman, should he win the competition this summer, will be a undersized center second year with very limited starting experience. So even if you do have those guys upsetting and winning those competitions, they're essentially lateral moves at the left guard and center positions. And so that's why, I understand, and myself included, you're not particularly optimistic about the interior offensive line being drastically better this season than it was a year ago. at least at right tackle, you can sit here and say that bringing in Jermaine Fetty is not the same as Caleb McGarry. Caleb McGarry is a good run blocker that has questionable pass protection skills, in large part due to having short arms. Jermaine Fetty is a questionable run blocker that has competent pass protecting skills that has long arms. At least with Fetty, you can convince yourself that if he wins the job, you'll get at least league average play in terms of pass protection, which is an upgrade, particularly if the Falcons wind up being a team like I think they will be, which is going to be a team that's going to throw the ball a lot more than they run the ball, because they're not going to be holding that many leads this upcoming season. And so you can make the argument that Jermaine Fetty is an upgrade or an advantageous fit for the Falcons at that right tackle position. It's hard to make those same arguments with the competition ongoing at left guard and center. And I think that's a contributing factor to why so many people are hoping that the Falcons add outside help at one or both of those positions between now and the start of training camp. We know Arthur Smith sort of intimated that, talked about that on yesterday's episode, that there may be more trench help coming. I'm particularly looking forward, as I mentioned earlier on today's episode, that, that's going to come in the form of defensive linemen, but you certainly will not hear me complaining if they wind up signing more proven offensive linemen that bring a different and better skill set to this roster moving forward. So, that's why you'll sit here and hear me say, hey, they're running it back with Jalen Mayfield and Matt Hennessy. And before you say, well, what if Justin Shaffer and Drew Dahlman win the competition? It's still basically running it back with basically the same exact type of player that they had a year ago. So we'll see if the Falcons change things up and are proactive this summer at upgrading that position, but we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. Luke at the Dirty Bird 1998 asks, since we know Atlanta is shopping Debo, but struggling to get any takers, likely due to his cap hit, is there any realistic options for a player trade cap hit for cap hit? Well, I mentioned in an episode last month about the Falcons trading him for CJ Mosley straight up. Obviously, Deion Jones has experience with Jeff Ulbrich, the Jets defensive coordinator. CJ Mosley has experience with Dean Pease, his former defensive coordinator in Baltimore as well. So it's not quite equal from a cap standpoint. The Jets would be saving roughly $7 million against their salary cap by swapping Mosley for Jones, while the Falcons would be adding roughly $1.5 million to their salary cap with that same swap. But the Falcons can certainly do that because they're currently $13 million under the cap, according to overthecap.com. Our last question comes from Micah at Micah Langston 2. He asks, what would be the most entertaining thing to replace the Pro Bowl game? Softball, soccer, basketball, hockey, paintball, etc. Anything really. I mean, I think the Pro Bowl should really be an opportunity to give players a vacation. Maybe you have some fan events, similar to if you've ever been to a Super Bowl, and the week before the Super Bowl, there's a whole bunch of like fan meet and greets and things and whatnot. I think you just have some skill challenges. You let players play whatever they want to play. We know that players are competitive, and they're going to be competitive in anything you do. They just don't want to get hurt. That's why the Pro Bowl stinks, because they don't want to play a football game where they risk injury, and just don't let them play other sports like basketball or anything where they can tear ACLs or sprain labrums and all these various things. So whether it's bowling, ping pong, you want to play knockout, you want to have them, curl, you want to have them run like a triathlon or something like that. And maybe not like a 10-mile thing, but like, swimming, biking, racing, or whatever the case, over like, a mile or something like that. Like, players will do it. I think having players be like a fish out of water doing sports that they've never really done would certainly be entertaining for people watching and whatnot. So like, I think the NFL has an opportunity to do literally anything. They could have a million different events. Just go down the Olympic events and just basically say like, when you want to do archery, you want to do biathlon or whatever the case may be, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, players are going to be competitive because they're just naturally competitive, and just ask them to do badminton or something like that, like, it'll work. So that's my suggestion for the Pro Bowl. Literally anything would work better than the current version of the game. And that's going to do it for us here on today's Twitter Tuesday. I appreciate everybody who's sending questions. I got a ton of questions. We will probably get to some of them later. One of them was from Michael Russo, and he was basically asking, why the 2020 offense looked better than the 2021 offense. And, I was trying to figure out a way to answer that question. I realized like this is a whole episode. So we may get into that on tomorrow's episode, and that may be the plan. And we'll get into some of your other additional questions as well, potentially tomorrow or later this week. And if you want to submit your questions for future Q&As and Twitter Tuesdays, you can do so via Twitter at Locked On Falcons, of course, via Facebook at Locked On Falcons, and I guess we'll have a Facebook Friday or something like that. We got to keep the alliteration going. And if you want to send an email, I don't have an alliteration off the top of my head, you can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, and you can leave a comment here on YouTube as well on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And guys, that will do it for us. And make sure for your second listen, after you've made Locked On Falcons or Locked On Sports Atlanta your second listen, go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, where they're breaking down all 32 NFL teams all summer long on your preferred podcast platform, whether that be Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, or of course on YouTube. Guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you for all your great questions. Thank you for allowing me to dive back into my childhood memories of flipping through books and seeing protoceratops and all that various stuff. Haven't thought about those things in quite some time. So appreciate those questions. Until next time.